Hello everyone, this is Manohar Reddy, Department of Cybersecurity, Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. Today in this session I am going to discuss about a concept of DNS cache poisoning. DNS cache poisoning. So DNS cache poisoning. So what is meant by DNS? So domain name system. A DNS referred as a domain name system. So it is like a phone book of the internet. It is like a phone book of the internet. So human access information online through some domain names. So suppose anybody wants to know about the information of any organizations or institutions, they can use the domain names to be searching. They can use the domain names to be searching, and they can use the domain names to get the information. They can use the domain names to get the information, like anytimes.com or espn.com or any different types of websites. So web browsers interacted through these IP addresses. So the domain name which we are giving a www.x.com, this domain is going to be translated or interacted with the internet protocol address. So this domain name system is maintained in the DNS server. This domain name system is maintained in the DNS server. So all the domain names are to be stored in a particular place called as DNS server. Particular place is called as DNS server. So this DNS translates the domain names into IP addresses. The DNS domain names are translated into IP addresses. So browsers can load internet resources. So until and unless the domain names are not translated into IP addresses, the browsers cannot load the internet resources. But when the domain names are to be translated into IP addresses, automatically browsers can load these internet resources. Browsers can load the internet resources. So that is nothing but DNS, a domain name system which stores in the DNS server. So to load the internet resources, the domain names are translated into IP addresses. So now coming to this point, cache poisoning. So cache poisoning is nothing but the attackers are going to insert the false information into this domain name system. The attackers are going to be insert the false information into the domain name system. So that is why we referred it as DNS cache poisoning. Is the act of nothing but it is a process of entering false information into DNS cache. So DNS cache is nothing but the storage. It is a buffer storage where all the domains get stored. So all the domains are stored in a particular place, a particular server that is called as DNS server. It maintains the cache information of the domain. It maintains a cache information of the domain. So that is nothing but DNS cache. So now the DNS cache poisoning is nothing but the process or the act of entering false information into this DNS cache. So that DNS queries, so whatever we are trying to find the information of any domain, the DNS queries return an incorrect response. So after injecting this false information into the website or into the DNS, automatically the queries returns an incorrect response and users are directed to the wrong websites. So once the DNS will be cache poisoning, automatically the DNS gets false information to the user. So DNS cache poisoning is also known as DNS spoofing. is also known as DNS spoofing. So from this point of view, from this definition, we are going to understand that a domain name server maintains all the domains. In that, the domains are going to be stored in particular cache server, that is nothing but DNS cache. So the attacker is going to inject or insert some false information into the DNS cache, so that all the DNS cache will get diverted in the form of DNS cache poisoning. So now the user is requested to find any website. Automatically it redirects and it delivers the false information. It redirects or it delivers false information. So that is nothing but incorrect response. Incorrect response. So that is nothing but DNS cache poisoning. So here the IP addresses are the room numbers of the internet and enabling web traffic to arrive in the right places. So if it is enabled, it enabled the web traffic to arrive in the right places. So that is nothing but the each and every domain, each and every IP protocol is going to be arrived in the right places. So DNS resolver caches. So DNS cache poisoning is over. DNS resolver caches are the campus directories like, and when they store faulty information, the traffic goes to the wrong places until the cached information is corrected. So the DNS resolver caches are the campus directories that can be resolves the cache information gets poison affected. Cache information gets poison affected. So wherever the faulty information is there, this DNS resolver cache traffic will goes to there and it gets corrected. It gets corrected. That means DNS resolver identifies the faulty information and gets it corrected. And it gets corrected because there is a typically no way for DNS resolvers to verify the data in their caches. Incorrect DNS information remains in the cache until its time to live expires or until it is removed manually. So the faulty information injected by the attacker, is stored in DNS cache until the time to live expires or it is removed manually. So if we are removing in the sense, then the data will get correctly. If we are not relieving in the sense, that get affected data will expires after the particular time. So what do DNS resolvers actually? What do DNS resolvers do? So DNS resolvers provides a clients with IP address. It provides a clients with IP address that is associated with the domain name. So the DNS resolvers provide some clients with the IP address that is associated with the domain name. So it identifies that IP address that is associated with domain name. In other words, they take human readable website addresses like google.com and translate them into machine readable IP addresses. So when a user attempts to navigate to the website, when user is trying to access that website, their operating system sends some request to the DNS resolver. So it sends a request to the DNS resolver. Now DNS resolver responds with that IP address because DNS resolver identifies whether the faulty information is there or not. If identifies, it responds with the IP addresses, and the web browser takes this address and initiate loading the website or loading the internet resources. So once DNS resolvers find that IP address is valid or the domain is valid which doesn't have any faulty information, then automatically it responds and automatically the browser takes that addresses and loads the internet resources. That is nothing but loading the website. So this is the way DNS resolver can do. So how does DNS cache work? So DNS cache poisoning process is there, but how it actually works? So DNS resolver will save responses to the IP addresses queries for a certain amount of time. So particular amount of time, DNS resolver will save all the responses to the IP addresses queries. The resolver can respond to the future queries, so future queries much more quickly without needing to communicating with the many servers involved in the typical DNS resolution process. So DNS resolvers save the responses in their cache for as long the designated time to live. So already we said that the DNS resolver finds that faulty information, and that faulty information maintains particular time to live experiment, or else it is associated with that IP addresses allowed to them. So now the DNS cache poisoning, after cache poisoning, how it gives the response? How it gives the response? So this is the DNS uncatched response. This is the DNS uncatched response. So here the first user, and he is the example.com, his IP address is 192.0.0.16. So now the user is requested for the example.com. So he is requested for the example.com website. Now the example.com website is going to be stored in DNS server, whether that DNS server is translated or not, and whether that DNS server is able to give the response or not. So now DNS server is going to requesting authoritative server. So now authoritative server gives a response to this DNS server, because there is no cache poisoning here. So now the uncatched response is like what? It is coming from authoritative response. So from here the DNS server will take the response, and DNS server will give the response to this website. So that is the 192.0.0.16. Now after translating this address, the user can able to see the contents of that website. So this is the way uncatched response will happen from the DNS server and authoritative server. And DNS cached response. So cached response is nothing but, we already said that the cache poisoning process is already happened in the DNS server. So now the second user is going to try to find the website information of example.com. So he's typed that what is example, IP example.com. Now the poisoning response is coming from DNS server, and that gives the response, cached response. From the DNS cache server. So this is the way we can understand the difference between DNS uncatched response and DNS cached response. DNS uncatched response and DNS cached response. Now, okay, how do attackers poison DNS caches? So we already said that DNS will be poisoned, DNS will be cache poisoning. But how the attackers do poison in the DNS caches? So attacker can poison DNS caches by impersonating DNS name servers. So that means they are misleading with the DNS name server. They are misbehave with the DNS name server, and they are doing some bad instructions with the DNS name server. So making a request to the DNS resolver and then forcing the reply when the DNS resolver queries a name server. So forging the reply when the DNS resolver queries a name server. So automatically attacker is going to forging that reply on DNS resolver queries. So this is possible because DNS server uses UDP instead of TCP. So UDP having a less security compared with the TCP protocol, and because currently there is no verification for DNS information. So like the way attackers do the poisoning in the DNS cache. So they are impersonating the DNS name servers, and they are sending a request to the resolver and forging the replies from the DNS resolver queries. So this is the way attackers can do the poison in DNS caches. So DNS cache poisoning process. DNS cache poisoning process. So how it will give the poisoning process. So attacker is going to stay here, and attacker is going to give the instructions to the DNS server like this. So what is the IP for example.com? So he sends some instructions to the DNS server, as well as, hey, I am an authoritative name server. I am an authoritative name server, and the IP address is 192.0.0.1. So like the way attacker sends some request to the DNS server, but actual authoritative name server IP address is what? 192.0.0.16. So now the attacker already attacks the DNS server and DNS spoofing. So now the user is going to get the information from this DNS server will definitely a faulty information. So this is the way DNS cache poisoning process will be happen in the real time. So once the user is trying to access the information about any website, the attacker is going to access that website and I entered false information into that website, so that the user gets all the information to be a false information, and poisoned DNS cache. So poisoned DNS, after getting the DNS to be poisoned cache, so how it works, how it responds. So here the user is going to ask the DNS server like what is the IP for example.com. So now the DNS server is cache server. DNS server is a cache server. So this cache server already maintains with the help of DNS name servers or DNS resolvers, and that gives the information, a faulty information to the user. So 192.0.0.17. Actual IP address is what? 192.0.0.16. User wants to access the information about this IP address, but the attacker already injects some faulty information into the DNS server. So now the DNS server is get cache poisoned, so that the user requested information is retrieved in the form of 192.0.0.17. So that is nothing but cache information. That is nothing but a malicious information. So that 192.0.0.17 is a malicious website. So after poisoning the DNS server, the user gets the information like this faulty information. So instead of using TCP, which requires both communicating parties to perform handshake, that means gives the user a request to the server, and the server gives the response to the user. So perform a handshake to initiate communication and verify the identity of the device. So DNS requests and responses use UDP or other the user datagram protocol. So with the UDP, there is no guarantee that a connection is open. There is no guarantee on that a connection is open. The recipient is ready to receive, and the UDP is vulnerable to forging. For this reason, an attacker can send a message via UDP and pretend its response from a legitimate server by forging the header data. So the DNS attacker gets DNS into the poisoning because of the protocol used is TCP or UDP, and which by forging the header data. So by forging that header data only, the user get compromised to access the faulty information from malicious websites or malicious servers. If a DNS resolver receives a forged response, it accepts and caches the data uncritically. Caches the data uncritically, because there is no way to verify the information is accurate and comes from legitimate source. Comes from legitimate source. That means the data, incoming data is from websites are not legitimate source. So DNS resolver does actually query the authoritative name server, attackers have only a few milliseconds to send the fake reply before the real reply from the authoritative name server arrives. So DNS resolvers do actually query the authoritative name server, but attackers have only few seconds to send the fake replies before the real reply from the authoritative name server. So authoritative name server gives a original response, but before that the forged responses are going to be DNS resolver with the help of some attackers. So attackers also have to either know or guess a number of factors. Actually, attackers also don't know the exact location or exact website, but they know or guess a number of factors to carry out a DNS spoofing attack. So they are attacking a DNS or they are attacking on DNS based on their guesses or based on their known purpose, based on their known or based on their guess purpose. Which DNS queries are not catched by the targeted DNS resolver, so that the resolver will query the authoritative name server. So DNS resolver gets query the authoritative name server. So DNS queries are not catched by the target DNS resolver, but the resolver will carry the authoritative name server. So what port the DNS resolver using? And they used to use the same port for every query, but now they use a different random port each time. So that is nothing but requested ID number, which authoritative name server the query will go. So if a malicious party operates or hacks or gains physical access to the DNS resolver, they can more easily after catched data. They can do more easily after catched data. So DNS spoofing and censorship. So several governments have intentionally poisoned DNS caches. So the DNS cache poisoning is illegal or illegal, but it is illegal for some governments. So several governments have intentionally poisoned DNS caches within their countries in order to deny some websites, deny access to certain websites or web resources. So to denying that some websites, the governments are poisoned that DNS caches, and so that the users who are the internet lovers cannot able to access that certain websites, those who are banned the government. For this, the government provides a DNS secure, that is nothing but DNS secure. So how will DNS secure help prevent this DNS poisoning? So DNS secure is short for domain name system security extensions. Domain name system security extensions, and it is a means of verifying the DNS data integrity and origin. So that is nothing but DNS data is unique or not, and whether it is modified or not, and it is the native place of that data. Native place of the data or DNS. So DNS was originally designed with no such verification, which is why DNS poisoning is possible. So because there are no verification originally designed, so for that the DNS poisoning is possible for the attackers easily. So this DNS secure extensions uses some public cryptography mechanisms, that is nothing but a way of digitally signing information to verify and authenticate data. So for any data, the verification is very important and authentication is also very important. So to verify and authentication data, this DNS secure extension uses some public cryptography. So DNS secure extensions were published in 2005, but DNS secure extension is not at mainstream, leaving DNS still vulnerable to attacks. So it also provides some protection from attackers, but it is not completely safe. It is not going to say that it is a safe, or it is a not at all possible for vulnerable attacks. So this is the way you can understand that DNS spoofing and censorship will happen in the real-time government process. So once again we will revise the topics which we discussed in this session. So what are the topics we discussed in this session? We discussed like what is meant by DNS. So domain name system, it maintains all the DNS to be stored in one particular place. That is nothing but DNS server. And this DNS cache poisoning process. So what is meant by cache poisoning? So it is a part of our process of entering false information into the DNS cache, into the DNS server. So the domain name servers are maintained IP addresses. They are translated with IP addresses. So that IP addresses translation is also very important to load internet resources. Those are very important to load internet resources. And this DNS cache poisoning is also called as what? DNS spoofing. So some of the IP addresses are having fault information up to some extension of time, or else until we removed manually. So to identify that false information and to get corrected with the help of DNS resolver. So DNS resolvers do what they do. They provide some clients with the IP addresses that is associated with the domain name. They understand and they can check each and every IP address which is associated with the domain names. So which are human readables websites and which are responses to the DNS resolvers. And how the DNS cache will work. So before injecting into the DNS cache, before poisoning into the DNS cache, a normal DNS response is like what here. So user is going to requesting for particular site, and this site is there or not, it is checking in the DNS server, and it is going to be authoritative name server. It is given requested to the authoritative name server. Now authoritative name server will gives the response to the particular website if and only if it is authoritated, if it is authorized. So after authorized it IP address or website, the DNS server gives the response to the user. So this is the process the DNS uncatched response will get. DNS catched response. So the DNS server get affected with the DNS cache poisoning. So now the user gives an example or given the request to the DNS server, and the authoritative server will not present here. The authoritative name server will not present here because the DNS server get cache poisoned. So the user get information about that website is get faulty. So the user gets all the information about this website is became faulty. So faulty information will get for the user. So before doing this, how the attacker poison DNS caches? So they are impersonating the DNS name server, and they are forcing the replies with the DNS resolver and weak of the protocol. So because of these three issues, the attackers do poison in the DNS cache process. So how the DNS cache will be poisoning here? So this is the DNS server, and the user trying to gives the response. Gives the request to the server, and DNS server is going to be use the IP address which is attacked by the attacker, because the attacker poisoned this DNS server, so that finally DNS server is handled with the attacker. So now the attacker gives the response to the authoritative name server is like what he actually proceeded. So poisoned DNS. So after poisoned DNS, how it gives the response to the user. So user requesting for the particular website, Now the DNS server is not able to contacting with the authoritative name server because the DNS server gets cache poisoned already. Gets cache poisoned. So now the DNS server gets cache poisoned so that all the requested information is going to be gives the response with the DNS server faulty information. Gives the faulty information. So that is the user is requested for what is the IP address of example.com. Actually, the IP address of example.com is 192.0.0.16. But after get requested to the DNS server, this is a DNS cache poisoned server. So this gives the response like 192.0.0.17. So that means it gives indirectly faulty information. It gives indirectly faulty information to the user. So after poisoned, the response will get like this. So to do this, to avoid this DNS spoofing and censorship, government will take care about this DNS spoofing. So DNS maintains governments maintain some mechanism like it maintains some ban or denying some websites by intentionally poisoning DNS caches in the some countries. So they are intentionally poison some websites. They are going to be denied to access the user. They are going to be denied to access the users. So DNS secure extensions also one of the government policies that maintains data integrity and origin of any domain that it is going to be registered in the domain name server. So this is the way we can understand that DNS cache poisoning process and how the DNS will get cache poisoned process and what are the steps to take care of any domains in the real time. So thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.